program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
We do attempt to conduct our hearings in a relatively informal manner, but within those constraints, we must deal with the issues before us in an orderly and businesslike fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first after the city has made their presentation, and then we open it up to a public hearing so that others can come forward one at a time and speak. Please, if you are speaking on an issue that the person before you has also spoken on, make sure your thoughts are fresh so we don't have a lot of repetition. And then once the people have spoken, we close the public hearing and then we take action. So with that, the first item on our agenda tonight is a public hearing for recommendation, the sign code ordinance amendment.
Good evening. Tonight is the public hearing for the proposed changes to the sign code that addresses a court case dating back to 2015 in Arizona that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Commission has discussed these changes twice, once on a fairly general basis back in December when we kind of talked about the court case itself, and then in June when you authorized this public hearing and reviewed the draft ordinance. As we discussed back in June, the City Manager's Office directed staff to work on this update this year, and we've been working with the City Attorney's Office to make these changes. Doug Hofer from the Attorney's Office is here tonight. Doug is the Assistant City Attorney. I should note that the implementation plan from the comprehensive plan states that the city should be considering an update to the sign code in 2018. So we'll probably be back to you next year at some point looking at some further updates that don't relate to this court case. Some things that we would, as staff, would recommend. We'll have a discussion with the Plan Commission, and maybe some other organizations may want to chime in terms of what some potential changes could be. So that'll happen next year. Back to this amendment tonight, the major issue that came out of this court case in Arizona is that signs cannot be regulated based on the message or what they say, and content neutrality is the legal term that's used. An example in terms of what that means is that many cities have ordinances for certain types of signs that may only allow, for example, just the business name to be on that sign rather than any other advertising. And in Eau Claire's case, we have similar situations within our ordinance. So basically, in this case, the ordinance would be relating to the message or the sign content, where the court case says that the signs cannot regulate in terms of what the sign says. We can regulate in terms of lighting, dimensional types of things, such as that. And there are a few exceptions to that, and I'll kind of get into that as I go through this. I won't get into the specifics of the court case itself. If you have some questions on that, Doug would be, I'm sure, happy to come up and discuss the actual court case itself. In fact, he's given some presentations or workshops on that across the state. So that being said, we have studied the ruling, and based on our review, there are some traditional areas of signage that are included in our code right now that we can continue to regulate. These are some of the examples here. On-premise signs and off-premise signs can continue to be regulated, even though that there is actually a content based in terms of on-premise and off-premise based on the discussions that came out of the court case. We still feel that we can distinguish between the two and regulate the two separately. Ordinances can provide differing standards for residential districts and commercial districts, and also even within commercial districts we can regulate differently. For example, within a C2 district versus a C3 district, we can have separate regulations. Sign districts are relating to specific geographic areas can provide differing standards. We have 4 sign districts within the city of Eau Claire, so we can retain those 4 sign districts. Ordinances can regulate dimensional standards, as I mentioned before, and those would be examples would be size, height, illumination, number of signs, setback, design, and those types of things. And then lastly, this is kind of key to something that we'll get into in just a minute, but is that standards can be established for signs that provide a warning, have a governmental interest, or have a public safety or informative purpose in terms of directing people or guiding people either within a site or maybe to a site. So that's kind of a key component of the update. So based on this direction, staff has attempted to remove as much as the content-based wording within the ordinance as much as we felt was appropriate that would withstand a challenge. In making these changes, we've tried to retain most of the standards within the ordinance rather than trying to redraft the ordinance from scratch or do a whole new ordinance like some communities have had. So we tried to work within the ordinance that we have right now. So what I'd like to do is just kind of highlight a couple of the changes within that's before you here tonight. First relates to identification signs. There's a number of references within our code relating to identification signs. An identification sign basically is a narrow definition of a sign. It essentially is only indicating that the name of the business should be shown on a particular sign. So again, that's content-based because we're regulating what the message would be. And those apply in a number of different areas. In residential areas, we require basically only or allow only identification signs. In C1A districts, we only allow identification signs. In other words, we're only on a sign, the code would say you can only have the name of the business on the sign and nothing else. Awning signs is the same type of a thing, that basically only the name of the business is supposed to be on the awning. So within these three categories, because of the change, because of the court case, we're essentially eliminating identification signs. So on any of these three cases, as long as it's an on-premise sign, they can put whatever message they want to in those cases. So for example, on an awning, they can advertise products, they can put in phone numbers, emails, or those types of things, whereas before it was specifically limited to basically the name of the business. This last one here relates to the motor fuel canopies. The sign code there currently states that on the face of a motor fuel canopy, you can either put the name of the business or pricing for the motor fuel, and it's limited to that. So based on this change, that would again, that would change, and a business could provide product advertising on a motor fuel canopy and those types of things. So it really expands what a business can do because of this change. The next area of change, and this changes somewhat the actual format of the ordinance, and this relates to temporary signs that are in section 1616.110, and then signs that are exempt from permits. There's a large number of signs that are regulated within the sign code, but we don't require sign permits for, and that's in this section here. And those are on pages 23 through 34 in your packet. As I mentioned before, one of the key things that came out of the court case is that we can continue to regulate signs based if they provide a warning, if they have a governmental purpose, or if they have a public safety or informative purpose in terms of directing people. And again, this is a content-based type of a provision. So what we've done within these two categories of signs is we've grouped them into two classifications. Those signs that have that public safety or governmental component, and then those that are more of a general purpose type of a sign. Examples of those would be like a banner that a business would put up on a wall of a building to advertise a sale. It could be a thrift sale sign. Those are kind of general purpose types of signs that would fall into this category. So we tried to put as many of the signs into this category here in terms of that we basically can somewhat regulate the wording or the content that's on those signs. The last three that I just want to mention, other changes that come into play, is for signs for businesses that have drive-up windows or you have a menu board sign. We've made the appropriate changes to make the wording so it's not content-based. So basically, rather than saying a business can have a menu board, we're saying that if a business has a drive-up window, they can have a sign, essentially, for that. That's kind of how some of these are occurring. In this particular case, we're tying that to the site plan review because in looking at over the recent years in terms of the standards of what some of the businesses have wanted versus our code, we're a little bit out of step with kind of the general norm is. So we've made a couple changes in terms of we've increased the allowable size for this type of a sign from 32 square feet up to 40 square feet, and then the height from 6 feet to 8 feet. And then they do have the option or the possibility of having multiple menu boards, which some of the restaurants do have. So essentially, over the last few years, we've been administratively allowing those, but we want to bring the code basically up to par with what we've been administrating over the years. And that would be done through the Plan Commission with the site plan review. This next provision here, the substitution clause, causes me a little bit of heartburn in terms of having this in the code. This is on page 11. This relates directly to the court case. And essentially the wording says, any sign authorized by this chapter may contain a non-commercial message. So in other words, any sign that is allowed under our code, the owner of that sign can decide to switch out the message on that and put in some kind of a non-commercial message on that sign. We don't know at this point how that's going to pan out, what the implications will be. But again, this is something that pretty much all the legal entities have indicated that that needs to be included in any municipality's ordinance. So we'll see what happens there. Then the last change here, this is something we talked about back in June. This relates to, we were approached by representatives of the board of directors from the community arts facility being constructed downtown. And they are looking at the possibility of maybe wanting to install a wall sign that would be larger than what we allow currently downtown, which is 100 square feet in size. So what we have is a change that would look at addressing that concern. It would be through a conditional use permit. So it would be reviewed by the Planning Commission. We included criteria in terms of how that would be reviewed. And so it wouldn't necessarily apply just to that specific facility. It would apply to any business downtown could theoretically come forward and request that conditional use permit. So this particular change is aside from the court case. So with that, I guess if you have any questions of myself or Doug, this would be considered by the City Council next Monday night.
Commissioner Peterson, sorry.
I noticed the court case referred to a case in Arizona that involved display of temporary signs. How does this relate to permanent signs?
It relates to permanent signs because the ruling that came down basically got into what the content or what the wording was on a particular sign. So even though that case related to temporary signs, it's far-reaching in terms of it basically applies to any kind of sign, whether it's temporary or a permanent sign. So like I mentioned, where the current ordinance, for example, for an awning sign said it only can be the name of the business. That's a content-based provision, and that needs to be eliminated. So we have to remove that.
Do you know, or does our lawyer know if there may be another case that would come up that refers only to permanent signs? That would be in.
Well, at this point, this is what we have to work with. I guess Doug can add to that. There was a recent Ninth Circuit court case regarding on-premise signs and off-premise signs in San Francisco, and they ruled In that case, they reaffirmed that there is a distinction between on-premise and off-premise, so that was good. But Doug, if you want to.
You were specifically asking about the distinction between on-premise and off-premise signs?
No, temporary and permanent.
Temporary and permanent. One of the things the court case said is that time-related restrictions that aren't content-based will be okay. So, for example, if you have rules for rental signs that are up permanently, and that's one set of rules, versus in a different set of rules that are up temporarily, that's okay, because that's a time-based restriction. You don't have to look at what the content of the sign is to determine what rule applies. And so a number of rules they said would be okay would be location-based rules, time-based rules, and a variety of other ones. I have a list here that they said would be okay, but time would be one of the rules that would be okay under the Reed decision.
But still, in that, the case was content related to temporary signs.
No, but they didn't limit their holding to temporary signs. You're correct that the ordinance in question in Arizona was focused primarily on the treatment of temporary signs, and in that case it was temporary directional signs. But their holding of the U.S. Supreme Court in the Reed decision was not limited to temporary signs. They made a very broad ruling that thankfully hasn't been interpreted as broadly as some municipal attorneys feared at the time in terms of how we regulate speech above and beyond just signs. But there's no question it applies to not only temporary signs, but permanent signs as well.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for the attorney since he's here? Commissioner Mitchell.
Thank you. First question regarding that substitution clause, any sign authorized may contain a non-commercial message. How is that not regulating content?
It is, but what Reed says is that in other case law says is you can't give commercial speech preferential treatment over non-commercial speech. So this substitution clause is a standard best practice that you're going to see every sign ordinance that's been revised since the Reed case come out include. Again, I guess one thing I'll add is I personally, and this is just Doug Hofer speaking, I'm not a big fan of the Reed decision. I thought the prior rules that we had to adhere to prior to that decision were reasonable. What the prior cases looked at is primarily more viewpoint discrimination instead of content discrimination. And the difference is, content discrimination, a content-based rule would be a rule that looks at political signs and has certain rules for political signs. A viewpoint, a rule that discriminates based on viewpoint would say different rules for Democratic Party signs than Republican Party signs. So as long as the government wasn't applying different rules based on the viewpoint of the sign, it was okay. What Reed says is they kind of went even a step further back and said, if we have to look at what's on the sign, whether that be a political sign or a real estate sign, if you have to look at the sign to know what the rule is, then it's content-based and it needs to survive strict scrutiny. The substitution clause is something we wish we didn't have to put in there, but in order for the sign code to meet the Reed standard, it's something we have to have.
Go ahead.
May I ask another one? I have two more. If
Yep,
that's
go ahead.
okay. On page 19 of the packet, or 16 of the ordinance,
Yep.
right at the top, there's little letter F that says not more than one LED electronic message center sign is allowed, period. And it takes out the rest of it, which I assume relates to the content-based rule.
Exactly.
That's a big change for us, and I guess I want to ask, I assume we'll still be able to, we'll be allowed to limit the amount of time that a message is displayed on the sign, which is something we do now, especially at intersections.
Yes. And one general comment I'll make, in reviewing the ordinance, what we tried to do is essentially just engage in surgery. And we tried to take out what we needed to take out and save as much of the ordinance as we could, because the feedback, my understanding, the feedback the planning department has received regarding the sign ordinance has been generally positive. And so the changes you have in front of you are the changes we felt we had to make to comply with the ruling and read.
Can I just add one thing to that too, is that even though in this section here where we're taking out that reference to strictly limited to on-premise, is that off-premise signs are only allowed in certain commercial districts. So even though we're taking that wording out, we're not allowing off-premise advertising to occur on that particular sign.
And
Go ahead.
finally, on page 26 or 23 of the ordinance, you're limiting thrift sales, rummage sales, and auctions to 3 times a year. Am I reading that correctly? And where did that 3 times a year come from?
Actually, that's in the current ordinance. If you go to the next page, on page 27, we crossed out a specific reference to thrift sales, and within that section it talked about displayed not more than 3 times per year, each period not being more than 9 consecutive days. So we basically just took that existing provision, deleted it on page 27, but then we added it back in the reference that you were talking about.
Then you added auctions to that.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
I think that's far too limiting. Is that something that the law now requires? The 3 times a year?
Well, that would be at a specific location.
No, to answer your question, no, the law doesn't require a certain number, however, in trying to modify the ordinance, what we tried to do is come up with reasonable limitations as far as time, because that's one thing we can do. So if you can only have a sign a certain number of times, we're certainly, if the Plan Commission has input as far as a number they think would be more reasonable, we're open to that. But what we wanted to try and avoid was having an unlimited ability to have signs, some of these more temporary signs. And that was one of the numbers we landed on.
Well, I guess just to clarify, we're not changing that standard. It's in the code right now, and that applies for auctions too.
I didn't notice.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll open it for a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to make public comment on this? Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this issue? Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I move for recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Mitchell.
Thank you. I think I'm going to vote for this for sure tonight. I'm going to work with the city attorney, I think perhaps to recommend a change at the council level. But I'm not ready to do that tonight because I'd just be pulling a number out of my head as well. So.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next item on our agenda for a public hearing for recommendation, a rezoning from RM to R2P, south side of Hudson Street, conditional use permit.
These are the properties. They're located on the south side of Hudson, west of 7th. The schools across the road, the parks to the west. R2 zoning is both to the south and to the east. A little better picture. This comes out of the neighborhood plan. Again, this is the property to be zoned to an R2. The orange is all the other R2. The nearest RM is over here. This is the park and the school. The aerial photo shows its older homes. 5 of these are duplexes. 2 of them are single family, and then the older homes around the site with the school and park. The Plan Commission did initiate this rezoning. These properties include 5 duplexes, 2 single-family homes. The Randall Park Neighborhood Plan calls for the city to initiate this rezoning. The Neighborhood Association requested the Plan Commission to start the process, and we included their letter and their section from their neighborhood plan in your packet. The citywide comprehensive plan does identify these areas as being appropriate for low-density residential development. There's always concern in doing these types of down zonings that we address non-conforming uses and try to minimize those. For this situation, the 5 existing duplexes on these are on lots that are 8,316 square foot in size. If this is down zoned to an R2 district, duplexes are allowed on 10,000 square foot lot. However, there's a section in code that allows the lot size to vary under a planned development zoning. This is an R2P, planned development. And also there's a section in codes that allows the Plan Commission to grant a conditional use permit for duplexes on lots 8 to 10,000 square foot in size. So for this situation, we would recommend the Plan Commission approve conditional use permits for the 5 existing duplexes on these properties so that you're not creating non-conforming uses for the situation. The zoning code also allows the setbacks to be varied under a planned development. And when you're doing this type of rezoning, you are changing the front yard setback from 20 feet to 30 feet. So again, to avoid creating non-conforming structures, we are recommending use that planned development provision to maintain that 20-foot front yard setback for these properties. So we've recommended approval with the 2 conditions, one with its recommendation on this rezoning. The Plan Commission is approving conditional use permits for the 5 existing duplexes, and that a front yard setback of 20 feet is maintained. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for Daryl? Commissioner Peterson?
If the 2 existing single-family homes were to want to convert to a duplex, would they need to come back for a conditional use permit because of the lot size?
Yes, they'd have to come to the Plan Commission.
Okay.
Commissioner Seymour?
Thank you. Daryl, if one of those duplexes were to be destroyed by fire or natural causes, would they be able to rebuild as a duplex then?
No, the lots are not big enough.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions for Daryl? Commissioner Mitchell?
The conditional use that would be given with this rezoning is it's strictly to do with the lot size, right?
Correct.
If there was anything else that required a conditional use, that would still have to come back here.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you. This is a public hearing. If anyone would like to speak on this issue.
Hi, my name is Chris Harder. I am from Chippewa Falls. I own 725 Hudson Street, which is kind of in the middle of the area here. The property owners, all except for one, was unable to get, we couldn't get a hold of them, as opposed to this. We feel that it's going to do undue just to us. We went and invested in these properties to further ourselves, and we feel that at this point it's going to be pulled away from us, especially if something ever happens on the properties. And we feel that it's not the appropriate action at this point. I own other mixed residential lots, and I bought those because they are the mixed residential. I invested in Eau Claire because of that, and now I feel it's being taken away from me. And the rest of the folks on this feel the same way too. especially since I'm not going to be able to rebuild on this property. So that's how I feel.
Very good. Are there any questions for the speaker? I don't see any. Thank you for coming forward. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this issue? Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I move approval with recommendations.
I'll second.
We have a motion, a second. Do we have any discussion? Commissioner Granlund.
Isn't it the case that these lots are too small to rebuild as they are currently built? That the current zoning would not allow,
No, with an RM zoning, duplexes are allowed on 8,000 square foot lot.
okay, so they would be,
You can, with an R2, rebuild a single-family home, but a duplex on an R2 zone lot has to have 10,000 square feet.
okay, so as they're currently zoned, it is the fact that they could rebuild a duplex?
Yep.
Okay, just, there were so many different alternates that I lost track.
Okay.
Commissioner Peterson.
If one of the buildings were to be destroyed by natural causes or whatever, what, under RM, what could they rebuild there?
Either a single-family home or duplex with the 8,300 and whatever square foot lot they have.
Okay, so what do we gain by rezoning it to R2?
The neighborhood petition for this change, if you look at the zoning maps, it makes sense. It's kind of a half block sitting out on its own with an RM zoning. By downzoning it to R2, it precludes multifamily development on these properties. If you had 2 or 3 of them consolidated into one larger lot, you wouldn't be able to do multifamily development with R2 zoning. You could only do single-family and duplex development. Is what I assume the main reason why the neighborhood plan had that provision in there, the desire to preclude multifamily development on these properties.
Okay, so if it were to be a purposeful tearing down of 2 or 3 structures, under the current zoning, they could apply for multifamily
Yes.
structure, where under the R2 zoning,
They
could not.
can't do it, correct.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion? Go ahead.
Thanks. I guess I'm probably not going to support it. I know I typically try and support everything the staff brings forward, but I just think these guys invested in all the properties, and it's, I think it's 100% of the owners. So I'm going to vote against it.
Any other commentary? Commissioner Larson.
I recognize the sort of the dilemma we have here. We have people that own property and have been invested in it for a purpose, up against what we have been working on as a neighborhood plan for this particular neighborhood for a number of years, really. We have encouraged and approved multi-family mixed use and high density housing along the southern border of this neighborhood, closer to Water Street. But on the other hand, one of our goals is to increase the number of single-family owner-occupied residences in that neighborhood. And in order to do so, some areas need to be rezoned. I think this is one of them. It's a hard choice, but I think this neighborhood has a lot of potential in the future for single-family home ownership, and I think this is the right direction to go, so I'm going to support it.
Is there any other commentary? Commissioner Peterson.
Daryl, would keeping the zoning RM preclude a property or 2 properties from rebuilding as single-family homes?
No, RM allows single-family homes on 6,000 square foot lots,
Okay,
as does R2 zoning.
okay.
Mhm.
So I'm going to probably vote against it.
Any other commentary? If not, we'll call the vote. Let's raise hands for this one. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. All right. Next item on the agenda, public hearing for recommendation, a rezoning from R1 to R3P at 3807 East Hamilton Avenue. It's a site plan for an 8-unit apartment building.
This is the property located off Hamilton at Pine Lodge Road, up against Highway 53. And the school's across the road. There's a single-family home, and this is a new mini warehouse facility that was just completed. Again, the aerial shows the school. There's a single-family home and the new mini warehouse recently completed. That's the site plan then for the project, showing the 8-plex up towards the front of the site, garages and surface parking behind the site. And there is a building elevation showing the front and back are the same and the sides are the same for the property. Also, a narrative was provided by applicant, and we included it in your packet. The project's an 8-unit building. It has 2 bedrooms for each unit. They have 11-car garage and 5 surface parking stalls. The Plan Commission designated this site as part of the 2015 Comprehensive Plan Update as being appropriate for commercial development. The text of the plan states in areas designated as commercial in the planned land use map, the city will consider residential zoning based on a set of criteria, and we include that criteria in your report. The Plan Commission will need to judge if an 8-plex on this property is consistent with these standards as noted in the comprehensive plan. We would note roads can accommodate the traffic from this use, and drainage is reviewed as part of this site plan review. The required parking for that 8-plex is 16 stalls. 11 of them are shown as garages. Those garages are shown at a 20-foot setback from the state right-of-way. A 50-foot setback is normally required. The state right-of-way is essentially a hillside as this roadway goes up a steep grade, and the state highway is substantially above grade from this site. If you require the 50-foot setback, essentially this will be a parking lot since parking is allowed within a setback. We believe garage parking would be more appropriate for this area and would recommend the 20-foot setback for these garages. There are landscaping, street trees, and foundation plantings. Bike parking is provided in the garages. The sidewalk, which they show around the building, needs to be connected to the sidewalk out on Pine Lodge Road. They do show a trash enclosure. Their exterior lights with wall packs will need to meet city standard. Site grading and drainage and other city services is reviewed in the report. The Plan Commission will need to find compliance with attached criteria from the comprehensive plan in order to recommend approval of the rezoning. We did provide a draft letter with conditions for your consideration if you want to approve the site plan. Those conditions require 2 copies of a revised site plan showing that sidewalk link out to the city sidewalk and noting exterior lighting meeting city standards. We need engineering approval of drainage. Engineering is also recommending they construct a transit pickup somewhere out along Pine Lodge. And again, that be connected from that sidewalk to the sidewalk along, around the building. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for Daryl? Commissioner Peterson?
We are requesting no requirement for a sidewalk connection to East Hamilton Avenue.
I don't believe there's one there at this time.
Yes, there is.
There is?
No, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. It's on the other side.
Yeah. When we looked at it, the most logical, since this is the front of the building, would be to go out, say, a door here, out to the sidewalk on Pine Lodge.
And no sidewalk on the south side of Hamilton at this time.
Correct.
Okay, I'm very happy to see them keeping the driveway where it is on
Yep.
the far east, or far west. I'm away from that intersection, which gets quite busy at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yes.
So, okay.
Are there any other questions for Daryl? I don't see any, thank you. Is the applicant here?
Hello, my name is Scott Erkey, and I'm representing Michael Benrud concerning this project. I'm his property manager for all the rest of his residential rentals here in town. Guess we believe that it's a very good plan for this location. The existing driveway is the driveway we'll be using, so you can see that on the parcel there. We just built the storage across the street. That is filled within about the first month that it was built, so. Questions?
Are there any questions for the applicant? I don't see any, thank you. Oh. Who? Oh, David. Go ahead, Commissioner
Thank you.
Klinkhammer.
Are there any problems with the conditions that Mr. Tufte spelled out, connecting the sidewalk, et cetera?
No, I don't think so. Shouldn't be an issue. I know the drainage thing we haven't worked through. We kind of have a temporary one, but obviously until it gets approved, we're not going to kind of go through that. But we'd certainly be considering all that. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any, thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to make public comment? Is there anyone who'd like to come forward? Is there anyone who'd like to come forward? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and I'll be looking for a motion.
I move for the rezoning and the site plan approval.
I'll second it with the conditions.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Is there any discussion? I don't see any. I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda, for approval, certified survey map at 4724 South Oakwood Hills Parkway.
This is the property located off South Oakwood Hills Parkway, just south of Gulf Road, north of Oak Knoll. And its surrounding is all single-family homes. There's a house on the property now, and the south half of the property is vacant. They are proposing a certified survey map with the existing house on one lot and a second lot that would modify the 20% slope line with the modification showing in green. And they have provided a preliminary grading plan for that property showing how it would be regraded in the back. And they use front retaining walls, which if you've been by the site, it's very similar in terms of those front retaining walls. The site's lifted up on the site. The road comes up into the site in order to meet grade. So basically, a CSM comes to you since they are modifying a 20% slope that was established as part of the plat for this property. Again, Lot 1 has an existing home. Lot 2 has been graded for a new home, in which case a disturbed an area of 20% slope that was labeled non-buildable. They are now requesting an amendment to that 20% slope line. The Plan Commission is being asked to initiate an amendment process to the 20% slope standard, which is within our sewer service plan. If you initiate this, it goes to West Central Regional Plan Commission and DNR for review of the request. City engineer will also be reviewing the grading for stabilization and drainage. We are recommending approval.
Are there any questions for Daryl? Commissioner Peterson?
What happens if we don't recommend approval? Do they have to fill it back into the 20% slope? 'Cause they should have stayed out of there.
Yeah. They
We'll ask them to stabilize it.
They probably will need to stabilize it at least. They could be fined. It's another provision in code. We haven't had to deal with one yet where we haven't gone and said, we'll do the amendment. So we haven't gone the other way yet in terms of what do you do if they already did the work and don't have the approval.
Because to me, that's what the ordinance is there for.
Yeah. But again, we have done minor changes like this for other areas within the community. So had they asked first, we probably would have brought it to Plan Commission and it likely would have went through. But again, it is your call in terms of they got the cart out in front of the horse on this one.
Yes, they certainly did.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for Daryl? I don't see any. Thank you. Is the applicant here?
Hello. My name is Eric Knauf. I'm a professional land surveyor, which has been retained by Mr. Sleeman for this project, and I'd entertain any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Peterson?
Have you recently been retained, or were you retained prior to the grading of the area?
I was retained after the site was graded.
Okay. Do you know who did the grading, whether it was the property owner or?
To the best of my knowledge, I believe the excavation was done under the direction of the current landowner.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? I don't see any right now. Thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to make commentary on this? Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Peterson?
I'm certainly going to vote against the recommendation. We have our 20% slope ordinance, and I think if we start granting exemptions after the fact, that we're going to welcome more in the future.
Is there any other commentary? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Next item, for approval, certified survey map at 4515 Brooks Drive. To approve a certified survey map for 3 lots in the town of Seymour.
This is the property in red off of Peterson, north of Tower. This is Books. City of Eau Claire is right here in terms of its proximity to the city limits. And there's a blow up then of Peterson and Books. And you can see the homes on the property, and there's one house on this lot. This then shows how they propose to take that lot, which is 1.87 acres in size, and split it into 3 0.623 acre lots. And also then shows the approximate lot sizes for the surrounding properties. It's a 1.87 acre lot. The applicant is proposing to split it into 3 0.623 acre lots. The property is within the sewer service area of the city. Under the terms of the agreement we have with the town and city subdivision code, the area is restricted to 10 acre lots. the Plan Commission can grant an exception to that 10-acre lot requirement based on the standards we note in our report. We would find the proposed lots are in an area that has been divided into lots of varying size to the proposed lot. The proposed lot split will create 3 lots being similar or smaller in size to other lots around it. The nearest sewer utility is about a half-mile away. The property is not abutting the city, so it cannot be annexed without bringing in other property. Creating these infill lots will lessen pressure on development outside the sewer service area. The proposed lot split can be done by CSM. And again, the proposed lots are similar or smaller in size than other lots around it. We would note again our concern with the size of these proposed lots being less than 1 acre in size. Smaller lots provide fewer options for septic system replacement should they fail in the future. An alternative to applicant's request is to approve 2 lots at about 0.94 acres in size. If the Plan Commission determines this request is consistent with the standards we have in your report, you may approve this request. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for Daryl? Commissioner Mitchell?
Thank you. Mr. Tufte, with all due respect, it looks like if this lot were to be divided into 3, that they're actually larger than a majority of the lots around it. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yes. We view these as all being similar. There's a 5-acre lot here. There's an 1.5 acre lot to the south. That's the way we viewed it. So it depends on how one views the situation.
Are there any other questions for Daryl? I don't see any. Thank you. Is the applicant here?
Yes.
Good evening.
If you would state your name and
Oh,
address,
I'm
please.
sorry. Pamela Loveland, 6583 North Shore Drive, Eau Claire, in the town of Seymour also. Yes, I wanted to point out that the actual lot sizes here and the area that I'm proposing to divide the 1.87 acre lot into 2 additional buildable lots, as well as the 1 lot that has a home on it presently, is zoned by the county R1L, which is residential. I'm not sure actually what the 1L stands for, but according to the county, their requirements are 20,000 square feet in the zoning of R1L. The property that is to the east, the 5-acre parcel, is zoned RH, so that is not the same zoning, county zoning, as the rest of these properties. The properties around it range from 0.350 acres, which is this property here, this property here. This property is 3.90. The one right next door to the existing home is 4.4 acres. So actually, these 3 lots would be larger, as you had noticed, than the majority of the adjoining properties, other than the one to the south of it. Here is the picture of, so this is this. So this is the existing home. And then we would have, that would be 0.623 acres, and then these 2 buildable lots here would be the same. I think that it is very much in keeping with the properties around it, as far as size. They all have septic systems. The area is very sandy. I spoke with a plumber regarding the soil there, and it should be no problem at all for a conventional system. And everyone else in the neighborhood has conventional systems as well.
Very good. Let's see if there's any questions. Are there any questions for the applicant? I don't see any. Thank you for coming forward.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to make commentary? Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion. Commissioner Peterson.
I'll make a motion to approve the request to subdivide into 3 lots.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda is for recommendation and easement to provide an easement for utilities at 4937 and 4939 Coventry Court. Thank you.
So the city has worked with the property owners of 4937 and 4939 to obtain an easement. We are looking to obtain a utility easement along the south and westerly side of the property, as well as a temporary easement for staging purposes. Give you another view here. So the easements would go along the property here. The purpose is for, we need the utilities to go underneath the 94 for the development on the other side for the Mills Fleet Farm. We have reached agreements with the property owners. They have agreed, and we are just in the final steps. And that's not the right map. With that, is there any questions?
Are there any questions? I don't see any.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to make commentary on this issue? Would anyone like to speak? I don't see anyone moving. All right, we'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion.
Second?
We have a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, number 7, for recommendation and easement, to provide an easement at 97 West Madison Street.
All right. This one has 2 parts. We are looking to give an easement and receive an easement. This is the Lazy Monk property. There was a certified survey map done in May of 2015, and in the survey, in the map, we didn't include our light pole up here in the corner. Another example. So we have a city-owned light pole there that we don't currently have access to maintain, so we have reached out to them to gain that access. And while we were out there speaking with them, they had requested an easement back from us for a storm sewer drain. They have a building right here that they access. The engineering department and the city didn't see any reason that we couldn't allow that easement for the storm sewer drain out there, so we worked with them to negotiate both. And with that, are there questions on this one?
Are there any questions? I don't see any. Thank you. Once again, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to make comment on this? Is there anyone who would like to speak? I don't see any, so we'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I move approval.
We have a motion?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, for recommendation, an easement, to provide an easement on Hewitt Street.
All right. Let's see. All right. Let's start with this one. The city has reached out to NSP. We're looking to acquire a section of their property as well as an easement and give them back an easement. The intent for us is to build a lift station here. We need the easement along this side for storage and to maintain the property. They're requesting a 10-foot easement here. That would be an underground easement for their utilities. This shows a view, an aerial view of the property. We own this section. We're looking at acquiring 6,870 square feet here, along with another 3,819 square feet for the storage. They have provided a survey map of the property. This is the property we're trying to acquire with the easement, and then their 10-foot easement back along the right-of-way on Hewitt Street. Old Wells Road is over here. That's why it mentions Old Wells Road. It's a corner of Old Wells Road and Hewitt Street. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this issue? Is there anyone who would like to make a comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Commissioner Peterson? Who you choose? Okay. Is there any commentary? If not, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. For approval, site plan, Cedar Creek Church Addition at 3520 East Wind Drive, to approve a site plan for an addition to the Cedar Creek Church.
This is the church's property east of Highway 53 off of East Wind, across from South Wind. And that's the site plan showing their parking lot, the existing church, the proposed addition, which is linked to the church and does have a canopy out to the front. And then some building elevations. That's a 3,780 square foot addition with that corridor connection to the existing church. And they are also then adding a front canopy for drop-off and pickup. There currently is 130 parking stalls. With this addition, they actually lose 2 stalls. The floor plan shows this addition is for office, conference room, and break room. By city code, the addition does not have a parking requirement. The parking requirement for a church is based on the seating capacity in the main sanctuary. We did go out and inspect the site. It does have adequate landscaping. There's a nice buffering along this lot line for the existing single-family homes further to the east. They have a dumpster enclosure, and it appears their exterior lighting meets our standards. Site grading, drainage, other city services are reviewed in the report. The draft letter recommends approval, subject to city engineer approval of drainage, and if they add new lighting, it needs to meet city standards.
Are there any questions for Daryl? Commissioner Mitchell?
Thank you. Not directly related to this project, but a church can add anything in any amount of space, and parking is unrelated?
Not always. This one, we could have administratively approved, but because of the size of the addition, we thought it should go Plan Commission to be approved, so there's a public meeting involved with it. But there are other additions where we can determine you're affecting the parking because of how that addition's being used. But normally, most churches, the parking requirement's based on the seating capacity in the main sanctuary. There are some churches that also operate schools, and then you run into a conditional use permit when there's a school within the church and added parking for teachers or instructors. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions for Daryl? I don't see any. Thank you. Is the applicant here?
Hello, I'm Don Breedle, live at 427 Jefferson Street here in Eau Claire. I'm not the owner, actually, of the church, as shown in the staff report, but one of the congregants. I'm the chairman of the Building Expansion Committee. And just want to give an update. We were told in the letter that it was subject to the drainage specifics, and the Bauman Construction Company we've hired now as our general contractor just a week and a half ago, and AEC out of Altoona is currently doing the engineering and the water drainage work. So we'll have those as soon as we possibly can.
Very good. Is there anything you'd want to add to the presentation in terms of the use of the addition and so on and so forth?
No, I think he hit it on the head. It's for, well, he didn't mention the foyer, the entryway with the canopy over the driveway will allow a nice entryway, which we don't have now, and then a foyer area for coffee and congregating, and then the hallway into the sanctuary. And then the current offices that are part of that building will be in the new building, allowing us to make Sunday school rooms out of the current office space. We've had a tremendous growth in young kids in the church.
Very good. Are there any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Klinkhammer.
Mr. Briegel.
Yes, sir.
Or Dr. Briegel.
Thank you.
There's actually no change to the sanctuary itself, though. No increase in seating in the sanctuary.
No, we are contemplating at a second phase moving some of the interior walls. We won't need any foyer in that old part later, so it's possible at a later date we'd be thinking about moving that wall back.
Thank you.
And I suppose at that time whether the number of parking places would be adequate would be maybe one of the questions. We did add a second parking lot. You can see in the very top of the picture up on the north end about 7 or 8 years ago. And we don't seem to have a parking problem with lack of spaces at this point.
Very good. Are there any other questions for the applicant? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to make commentary on this? Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move approval with staff recommendation.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda for approval, a site plan, People's Bank Midwest, 4251 Southtown Drive, to approve a site plan for People's Bank Midwest.
This is the property located off Southtown Place, Southtown Drive, north of Gulf Road, London Road. And there's commercial office type activity all the way around it. And that's the site plan showing access off of both streets and the bank and the parking and a drive up on the north wall. And there are the building elevations for the project. That is a 5,317 square foot building with that drive-up facility. We are recommending a curb, which we've highlighted in pink, to separate the drive-up from the drive lane. The reason is the drive-up, you're going to be going that way, and the drive lane, you're going to be going that way. And we find that's best to define that difference so people don't run into each other. Their required parking is 22 stalls. They have 28 stalls on site. They do provide a mixture of street trees and foundation plantings, which we've highlighted on the site plan. Those street trees are subject to city foresters review since they're on the boulevard area. They do need to add a pedestrian link from their sidewalk on the building out to the sidewalk on one of the streets. A 6-foot dumpster, screen dumpster enclosure is noted. They will be providing wall packs for their light fixtures, which need to meet city standards. Their proposed signs need to meet C3 district standards, and we will review those with permits. We do want to note these signs, if they're directional signs, we can administratively take care of them. If they're not, they're within a setback and will need to be moved. It appears this will be their main sign, and that does meet proper setbacks. Site grading, drainage, and other city services are reviewed in our report. The site plan does show adding this driveway on Southtown Drive, and it literally would result in a 58-foot wide curb cut. We are recommending some type of a divide to distinguish that this is actually two curb cuts, and I've somewhat illustrated that on the site plan. We have provided a letter with conditions of approval. Those are provide 2 copies of a revised site plan, noting a sidewalk connection out to the city sidewalk, adding that curb for the drive-through facility, noting a 4-stall bike rack, engineering approval of drainage, and engineering approval of that separation between these 2 driveways. New lighting meeting city standards, and we'll review your signs as per C3 district standards with permits. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for Daryl? I don't see any. Is the applicant here?
My name is Mike O'Mara. I live at 5115 Mishler Drive, Eau Claire. I own the bank, and our bank will own the building. We are building this specifically for one reason: we're out of space. We're a little over 3,200 feet now, and we'll have about 5,300 feet. Do you have any questions?
Are there any questions for the applicant, Commissioner Klinkhammer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. O'Mara, are there any issues with any of the conditions that were specified in the letter, the connecting the sidewalk and making sure the signs are compliant?
Signs are no problem. I wasn't aware of the sidewalk issue. I would guess there's good reason for that. The purpose behind the not having a curb are a couple. One, it's a pain for the snowplows. It really makes a difference for the snowplows too, and you all know what I'm talking about. And then the curb gets all cut up. And then the second reason is when there's a curb there, it does not allow the people leaving the drive-through to take a turn as soon as they might otherwise. And so they end up going further to the west, I guess, and having to make a sharper turn. So it's a little bit inconvenient for the customer. I think I understand wouldn't want to have people running into each other. What we'd like to do is talk that over with your staff and see if there might be something other than a curb, maybe something decorative that could go in there that we could move in case of snow. But we're not gonna fight you on it, believe me. It's not that big a deal. If there needs to be a curb there, there'll be a curb there. That's the only way it can be approved. I think it's a surprise. That's a surprise to me, and I would guess it's a surprise to the architect.
Any other questions?
I guess my question would be of Mr. Tufte.
We've seen decorative concrete, drive-over curbs. It doesn't need to be a big humped curb. We understand the snow issue and the need even for emergency where folks all of a sudden decide, oh, we don't want to go through the drive-through, and then they want to get over the curb. So we understand that. It's just some way of delineating beyond just the striping. We find striping wears out over time, so something that delineates that you're in a different lane here. So we'll work with them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll play ball. Sure.
Very good.
Thanks.
Are there any other
Thank you.
questions for the applicant? Commissioner Peterson?
I wanted to grab Daryl while he was still up
Oops.
there. Daryl, are you talking about curbing only on the east side of the
Yes.
drive-through and not the west side? So
Yes, we
someone-
don't expect curbing on the exiting over here, just on the entrance here. Just so we understand that too.
Okay. Sure.
Commissioner?
And I'm a
Eric, did you have any other comments on any of those? Okay.
Go ahead,
One
Commissioner
more
Peterson.
question of the applicant. Have you talked to your neighbors to the west about reconstructing that driveway to a joint driveway between the two properties, like your two properties to the south of you have off of Gulf Road, where the driveway's on the property line?
I have not. I can.
Okay, that might be easier than a 50-some foot wide driveway. If you look on the aerial, which is right in front of you, I think, the one on
Yeah, okay.
up there, on the photo.
Ah,
There's a joint driveway on Gulf Road for the two properties south of you. And if you could
Oh,
configure
one of them's
something
mine.
like that with your property owner to the west of you, that would probably work out better than a 50-plus foot driveway.
right. I'll do that. I'll see if,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Mitchell?
Thank you. And as long as you mention your own driveway there, are you going to keep using that building as well, or you're going to
No,
everything
no.
to the new building?
Good question. That building, we will continue to own either in the corporation or maybe me personally, option one, and rent it out. Or if another user would like to own it, then we'd sell it. We're agnostic on that. But we expect similar type owner, tenant as currently are in the market. There's dentists and medical, and I think there's 11 places you can buy a cup of coffee. There should be 12. You know, the third, I think it'll be a similar, it's a good location, so I think it'll be a high volume, high quality, probably a national tenant, so. Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions for the applicant? I don't see any. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to make commentary on this issue? Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and I'd be looking for a motion.
I move approval with staff recommendations.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Granlund. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Next item on the agenda for discussion and direction, code compliance items. Commissioner Quinn-Cameron, do you have a is there any future agenda items we need to address? Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689 or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.